the silence, a child that's free. Silence comes over me. Hear the silence, a child that's free.
And greetings. Okay, and the short answer to the question that I'm going to propose here that a ministry partner brought up about, how do I break through? How do I get to the next level, etc. Well, I think you should come to the big idea workshop that I'm going to do. I was going to start it tonight, and I'm not quite there yet. Not quite ready. Almost. And I'm going to start next Monday, 6 p.m. Central Standard Time. Another 30-day clinic. You should get your position now in that class if you want to do it. It's via donation, and you do it, on your faith level. I recommend you put a tithe in based on your income level and sow the tithe with love. The idea with the tithe is that you sow it where you're receiving your spiritual nourishment. So here's a big idea. Oftentimes when people come to me and they're like, well, I've been tithing consistently for a long period of time, and I don't know what's going on here. Just make sure you're not doing one of the most common mistakes, which ironically enough is the most common mistake, but it doesn't have to be. And the most common mistake with tithing, other than, being all religious about it, or in terms of, well, I sowed 10%, I better get 100% back or something. It's not about that, okay? It's transferring your thought from supply as an outer means of coming to you to the supply being an inner kingdom manifestation. I'm getting it from my inner supply. You're transferring everything to the Spirit. You're putting a firm foundation on the Spirit. Okay, so you're not trusting in all of these rigged markets that are going on out here. Trust me, every market is rigged. If you're trying to play the markets and trade and do all these kind of things, best of luck to you. But we don't live in the days of, you read all these books you want from all these moguls like Warren Buffett and all this and that. I have my own opinions on that. I don't think any of that advice really means anything anymore. I think every market is 100% manipulated. AI is governing everything. And the beauty of that is that it gets you to turn away from that whole thing out there and turn to the Spirit within that knows all, is all, has all, and will provide for you ceaselessly. And there are two mistakes that most people make when they tithe. The first mistake is that they get all religious with God in terms of it doesn't become a loving relationship anymore. It becomes like a head game. Don't make it a head game. Don't make a head game out of your spiritual walk. Make it a loving faith-based relationship and learn to walk into trust. It's the most powerful force in the universe. The second thing is that they tithe to places like, okay, for an example, they get their spiritual nourishment from one place and then they go tithe somewhere else. It's more common than you can imagine. It makes about as much sense as going to Walmart and checking out with a bag of groceries and just not paying and walking right out the door. And then half an hour later, you pull up into Target and you go give them a check for the groceries. Say, here you go. It makes no sense, but that happens more than you would ever imagine. I never addressed it in my recent videos because I feel like it goes without saying, but the idea here is that you're following wisdom, and wisdom is going to bring you to the place of where you will be prospered. Wisdom will govern itself accordingly. Your job is to follow it. So wherever wisdom is reaching you, and wherever wisdom is causing you to move in faith, okay, outside of logic, you'll move in faith. Wherever wisdom is reaching you, you tithe there. This is pretty simple stuff, okay? That's how the game works. So if you want to sow a faith seed and you want to get into the big idea, I was going to say the big man upstairs, right? But the big idea workshop, I'm going to get into specifics on how to really get crystallized in your demonstration so you can manifest some pretty outrageously awesome things. So I've done this countless times. And this is what I always tell people, is I always say, I don't understand why people keep choosing to live in the sweat of the brow mentality, why they don't just give their life to God, why would you not just tithe, non-judgment, and follow the fastest path through joy, the 3-2-1 prosperity formula that I've been doing since the beginning of our ministry? Why would you not choose to live that way? It's so simple and it's so eloquent and it works so magical that to do it the sweat of the brow way, I can only think of one reason why you'd want to live like that, and that's just egotism. There's no other reason to do it, because it's really just a lot of work and not much payoff. You see, God knows all. So you can in essence say, even with all these rigged markets, the best traders, they're going to get bamboozled on the daily because they are trading against something that I would probably surmise that quantum computing and AI, all these things are already in full effect. We'll hear about it in 10 years from now, like, oh, wow, we were introducing our first, quantum interface for the public average Joe to use or whatever. But trust me, everything is completely manipulated. But even God can show you where to be for everything to fall into your lap, because the outer does not get to determine where your supply comes from. That's the big mistake, is that people think that they have to go and educate themselves in the outer way of doing things to get supply. And what I'm here to tell you is that the blessing inside of the curse of everything being manipulated is that since that way really sucks now, and you're going to get out competed by AI, well, why do it to begin with? Why not just drop it all like a bad habit and go back into doing it God's way? Make the easy path the path that you take. If you didn't learn one thing during the whole lockdown era that started a couple years ago, is you should have learned how to put your priorities in check. Like what is really important? Every day, I look through this fictional hypnosis that they call the outer world out here. And another person's died. Another person's, something else, tragedy happened. And, these are all people I know, of course. And I'm sure you noticed the same thing. Well, what does that do? Well, it causes you to really have perspective, doesn't it? Okay, assuming that everything is different, and assuming that you have no idea about the actual terrain that you're on, assuming that you're not on terra firma, right? Now, I'm talking to anybody who's not rooted themselves completely in a spiritual foundation. But for anyone who's on the sweat of the brow, and they're out there, oh, I'm just gonna I'm going to make sure I do all my studies, and I'm going to get all my degrees, and I'm going to follow all the right rich people, and I'm going to do all the same calls that they make. And if you don't think that those very same people are about to get wrecked, then I don't really know what to tell you. But from my observation, and I'm a pretty astute student of just watching things as they are and not being swept away in these narratives that keep playing out. We live in a sea of narratives. Storytelling drives like everything, right? So I can see through all these stories, and the obvious elephant in the room stares at you the whole time. Well, the obvious elephant in the room is nobody knows what the hell they're doing anymore. But I'll tell you the real secret to this. If you get right with God and you get yourself in order, you get your house in order, in essence, this could be the most, I guess you would say, delicious time of life for you and your loved ones. Because what you'll discover is that doesn't matter what goes on out there. Doesn't matter. The dream is just that. It's just a dream. It's just a hallucination of the mortal. What one of my ministry partners, Charlie, called today in our session, he called it the carnival mind on accident. But I thought, that's not an accident. Let's call it the carnival mind. There it is. It's a circus. It's the carnival mind. Thank you, Charlie, for that. I'll give him credit where credit's due. He made that one up. So the carnival mind is out here, and it's running its little shenanigans, and it's going on and on and on and on, and it's just constantly changing and morphing itself into more and more and more ignorance. Just ignorance begets ignorance begets ignorance. And you're watching this whole thing just crumble. And yet, you have to ask yourself one thing. Is it crumbling? Is it somehow, is there wisdom going on here amid all of this nonsense? And I would surmise to you, yes, there is absolute perfection happening within what seems to be this catastrophic debacle, nightmare, whatever you want to call it. There is a perfecting order that is, was, and will be always, forever, eternal, unchanging. So the key that I really think you could focus on that will help you tremendously is this this word of unchanging good. I like to describe God as the eternal, unchanging good. The eternal, unchanging good. If God, this principal idea of manifestation which you reflect, now you don't get to be God, you're reflecting, okay? You're not the one doing all of the heavy lifting, if you will. You get to be the recipient of the good. You're in receivership of God's abundance of all good things. So your job is not to try to play God by going out and, being a superhero unto a world of darkness. Your intended design, if you will, you were created to worship. You were created to worship. You were created to adhere to divine truth and learn how to walk in that trust, which I called the most powerful force in the universe in my book. Now, the other day I was watching this video by Dr. Mary Neal, and she is, I think she was a board certified spine surgeon, some kind, very educated in a lot of ways, but she really received, I think, her ultimate education where spirit meets science, is what she likes to talk about, how spirit meets science, when she died. And she was under, I believe, 10 feet of water for 30 minutes. She was on one of those kayaking adventures, I think, or something along those lines, and she got stuck underwater, and so she died. And she got to go and meet all of her spirit people. She got to understand the ways of spirit, and get some real powerful life lessons. And to sum up what she said in her talk is she said that, when we learn to trust, this is really the secret from her perspective of having been dead. When we learn to trust. So she broke it down how she just trusts this moment completely. The wisdom of this moment. Now, I have always taught in my workshops that, outside of the thinking mind, you have the knowing mind. And the knowing mind is demonstrated by your faith in trusting this moment, so much so that you drop the world. And once you drop the world, then you walk in that freedom. Good afternoon. I'm back again. I'm going to splice this together and we'll just roll with it from here. So let's talk about what to do if you're doing everything you possibly can and you're stuck and you're not receiving grace, and you're not prospering the way that you'd want to prosper, etc. Well, ironically, I make the title or the domain for the October retreat makefatherproud.com. And really, what you have to do to make Father proud is to trust. That's it. Now, that goes against all of the works and the human activities that we're so accustomed to. We think we have to do 100,000 rituals to get God to do something for us, but that's just man's way of thinking. God already did it all. So if we were just to accept it and just to have innocent, childlike faith, we could receive God's promises. And then even beyond that, we could go into the gnosis of the Father and come into our maturity. And that's like coming full circle almost. So to come full circle, you recognize that, well, it's true because God said it's true. And just because the whole world believes otherwise doesn't make the world right. The entire healing ministry of Joel Goldsmith, who was a Christian Science practitioner for 17 years, I believe, and then he went on to create his own model organization. It rests upon two pillars. And these two pillars were that, there's God's creation, which is holy, perfect God, perfect man. And then you have the world hypnosis. And he said everything under the sun, all disease, discord, lack, poverty, strife, suffering, shortages, depravity, discord, those are all hypnosis. So he said this is all a state of hypnosis. And what he said is that when you come to recognize it as hypnosis, well, it's no longer effective over you anymore because now it's just a state of hypnosis. So what do you do then? Well, just rest in the truth. Rest in the truth. In the Nag Hammadi library, in the Gospel of Truth, Jesus rested to receive. Well, it seems to be a receiving issue. So, here's the bottom line. If you're not getting what you believe is God's grace, it's because human arrogance is driving. You're driving through human arrogance through your labyrinth of your mind. Just stop. It's not your works that do anything. And along with that, you might need to look at all of the facets of what you're doing and ask yourself a real tough question. Am I trying to impose my will on the world and trying to make, myself something, make myself known, make myself valuable, validated, whatever? Or am I just trying to know the Father better? Because the latter is the solution. If your chief aim and goal is to know the Father better, well, then your heart's in the right space. So the purpose of all of your works and all of your spiritual pursuits should not be to get something. You can't get anything in completeness. You're already complete. It should not be to heal even. You shouldn't even be interested in fixing a problem. You just admitted there is a problem if you want to fix one. Just call it all a hypnosis. A business that's not thriving, hypnosis. Sickness in the body, hypnosis. Poor relationships, hypnosis. And this hypnosis shows up as, 7, 8 billion different people on the planet, and it shows up in people, circumstances, events in time and space, and then we ascribe qualities of good and evil to all of these illusions. Again, hypnosis. Be still and see the salvation of the Lord. Well, the salvation of the Lord is the redeeming grace of God, so being still is to separate yourself from the world. Separate yourself from the world mind. Don't try to do anything. Don't try to make it about your works. Stop striving. Stop trying to hustle. That stuff's all world belief, and it's designed to keep its own ignorance alive. You don't have to strive to arrive. You've already arrived. You begin pouring out from the fullness that you are. And stop making your plans. Now get this. Stop making your plans God's priority. Well, if God doesn't prosper my business, well, then this God's a fraud. Well, how do you know your business has anything to do with God's business? How do you know that business is where God has already prospered you? Are you trying to prosper outside of God's provision? Impossible. And the human mind says, well, I can't see it then. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. If I can't see God's provision, how am I supposed to claim it? Well, first of all, you go on God's promises and you trust them. Like my last video that was on the tithe, I built my whole ministry on that because I know that I'm not that great. And I know that I can't do it. I can't do it without God. I never could. I never could do it without God. But my humility to tell you that is really how I've been able to access these visions and ideas that come to me. And these things will come to me, and I see them because I'm not holding something else in my mind, blocking out the good that God's trying to put into my world. God's trying to become manifest through me. You can say that to yourself right now. God's trying to become fully manifest through me. What should I surrender so that I can receive? Well, look at any place where you're not providing rest. Anything that's agitated inside of yourself. Impatience. Are you impatient about something? The saying goes that infinite patience produces immediate results. Well, infinite is God. God's patience produces immediate results. So can you have infinite patience? Well, if you had infinite patience and you took it to the nth degree, you would be standing still. And then you'd be seeing the salvation of the Lord. Infinite patience carried out to its full extent would be standing still, because you would remove time. So infinite patience is the removal of time. And I'll go even further and say that it's the removal of time-space illusion. Infinite patience. What do you do with your infinite patience? Decide where you're going to trust God and go and correct your thought about whatever situation, event, or circumstance seems to be troubling you. Well, God is spirit. God's not in a physical body. The law of spirit is governing all creation. Well, that law is always for expansion, and it's always for good. So therefore, it's always demonstrating goodness everywhere. So right where I seem to be stuck and I seem to be withheld from my good, it's hypnosis. I call it hypnosis. Mary Baker Eddy called it animal magnetism. Same thing. World mind hypnosis. Carnal belief. Paul called it the carnal mind, the serpent. So if you're trying to fix the hypnosis, you just create more hypnosis. It's just a different brand of hypnosis. Instead, you just be still and know that I'm God. And you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. The truth. Well, the truth is God made one creation and you're in it. And that creation is divine harmony expressing itself in infinite ways as appearing to creation itself, which we are part of, as goodness, love, peace, joy, harmony, faith, gentleness, meekness. So right where I am, the goodness of the Lord is bountifully present. And you see, you can look at your lack in that same situation that was in the carnal mind, and you change your thought about what you think you saw. I never saw lack because God never created it. The carnal mind, the world mind, observes lack and tries to use me as a host so that it can observe something God didn't create and come alive through ignorance and try to hide the good. And that's what hypnosis is. Hypnosis is the changing of perception. And, as human subjects can be put into hypnosis, they can be made to feel things that they don't normally feel. They can be made to not feel things. They can see things that aren't there. And as Phineas Parker's Quimby discovered, he was one of Mary Baker Eddy's first teachers of the mind science, is that he had a guy called Mesmer. That's what they came up with, mesmerism, which is hypnosis. And he would put him under in hypnosis, and then he could read all the thoughts of everyone in the room, even dead people. What is that? What is that? Well, more profitable to think about what is that is just to see it for what it is. It is exactly that. All of the suggestions out there, just like when somebody comes into a room and they yawn, and everybody yawns in the room, it's called hypnosis. And the real sickness in the world is all transferred through belief. It's all transferred through that same hypnosis. Just like the guy, two different examples. There was a guy who locked himself in a freezer. I think it was one night after work or something. He got locked in the freezer where they keep all the frozen stuff. And they found him in the morning frozen to death, stone cold, dead. And ironically enough, the freezer wasn't on that night. But yet the hypnosis carried forth the full extent of its law because he didn't challenge the law by trumping it, no pun intended, with a higher degree of awareness. So in essence, he went from thinking and feeling. He took all of his reasoning from thinking and feeling, which is human reasoning. Aside from that, we have to step into spiritual sense. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. Another example was there was an inmate who had been, given a lifelong sentence or something worse than that at one time. And they allowed a bunch of college students to do a psychological test on him where they were telling him a lie. They were saying, oh, you're bleeding from the inside out, you're internally bleeding. And so they would present to him, it was a lie, but they told him, you're bleeding inside out, and he ended up bleeding to death. Literally. Okay, well, there's your example of what's happening in the world when everybody's sick. There's your idea right there. It's hypnosis. And systemically, that comes through the airwaves. Now they call Satan the prince of the air for a reason. Well, look at what's coming to you from the ether, from the airwaves. What's coming to you? Well, you're getting impressions all day about financial depravity, recession, depression. You're getting sickness thoughts sent to you. Oh, you're gonna get the thing, and hey, look, we're all the target of that type of infringement upon our peace of mind. Now, here's the difference between our reactions to it. It doesn't matter what it is, it's hypnosis. So if a bill shows up in the mail and you don't have enough money to pay it, hypnosis. Well, how do I know it's hypnosis? How do I know that's not from God? Because nothing in time, space, and objective form was ever created. The condition of matter doesn't exist. Spirit is ever increasing itself through our awareness when we yield to our spiritual sense. So our spiritual sense is our faith man. That's our faith. So how we use our faith is, for example, I'll use tithing as the first example. When I didn't have money, and that used to be my situation all the time, the bill showed up, I had no money. God's promise was that if I brought the first tenth, the best tenth, and I put it before God and didn't make it about my works, but about his promises, that he shall open the windows of heaven and pour a blessing. I believed it. And because I believed it, it lifted me out of that hypnosis. So the idea that I'm going to convey to you is that the way out of your hypnosis is always through an act of faith, by using your spiritual sense to reach your thought up to a divine idea. And that progressive realization of a worthy idea makes you worthy as the recipient of that idea once you rest your case and settle it in your heart. Now, how do you settle something in your heart? Well, the entire world can tell me that our supply comes from man, that our supply comes from our stocks, our businesses, our royalties, all of these ideas. The entire world can tell me this. And I can say that's blasphemy, because my supply is divine love, and divine love supplies all of my needs. And I will put none of those other gods of Egypt before the living God within me. All of those other ideas are the gods of Egypt. They're false idols. If I put any of them on a pedestal, including if I think that, some business that I came up with, well, God, you better prosper this business. I've been tithing to you. Why are you not giving me 1 million customers? Why are you not prospering me? This is stupid. I don't believe you, God. Well, look where your heart goes then. You're trying to fix hypnosis. I'll let you sit with that for just a second. You're trying to improve a condition of hypnosis. Can you improve the picture of evil? No. Well, why do I say it's evil? Because the implication is that you have witnessed a lack of good somewhere in God's creation. And out of that witnessing of the lack, you're making a human effort to try to be a God, even so much as to try to invoke a God which makes you more superior than God in your estimation of yourself. Because if you can invoke God and you can make God your servant, think about it. You're the reflection in the mirror. If your reflection in the mirror, image and likeness of, if you looked at yourself in the mirror right now, and that reflection started taunting you and started telling you to do what it says, in other words, inverting the power structure, you'd have a problem, wouldn't you? Okay, well, there's the problem. No, you can't invoke God because you are able to so-called co-create with God and invoke God to do your will and your bidding and all of these things. Any more than you can rearrange the stars in the heaven, because it's not your job. You were never designed for that. Your job is to trust that God is already running a perfect universe, and to find the scriptural doctrine that supplants your fear, in other words, your hypnotism, with a divine truth, and wrestle with that truth until you can rest in it, because you have come to the conclusion that even if everybody in this illusion tells you otherwise, you're not moving off of it. You're going to believe it and go down believing in it if you have to. And then when you stand with that infinite patience, in other words, you're standing still, you will see the salvation of the Lord. You have to work out your own salvation in this way. Now, it could be very likely that because of human will, you may be trying to prove a demonstration. You may be trying to force something to happen, is a better way to say it. Well, just remember the book Power versus Force. Force is what? Lack of power, lack of authority. Force is really all about weakness. Power is about strength, and power is related in spiritual qualities as humility, meekness. Why? Well, in the absence of my standing, okay, now standing is a legal term, so if I'm not making a position here, I'm not being a defendant to a claim out there that says, okay, here's a problem in the business, I better do something immediately, or else. If I don't call it hypnosis immediately, and I begin to try to fix material conditions through human understanding, again, it's rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Fine. For a season, you'll be able to pat yourself on the back, and you may find some temporary comfort in doing that. But there will come a moment in your evolution within thought, from material mindedness to spiritual sense, where you'll stop again and smell the roses. You'll smell the fragrance of the Spirit. So one thing that helps me mentally see this is, just remember that 3 human beings, if you take the empty space out of them, they can fit on the tip of a needle, the matter. And so the entire world's the size of a softball in the same conditions. The matter of the world is about the size of a softball. Well, if I look at where I am now, it doesn't look that way. So what is that? Well, it's hypnosis. So yes, I'm in a dream. I'm in a dream. Okay, so recognition that I'm in a dream is the first step to rising in thought and going beyond thinking and feeling. So thinking and feeling are mostly carnal apparatuses. Okay, I think there's a problem in the business. I feel that I should do this. Here's my reasoning. Let's go for it. It may work for a season. It may be okay for a temporary season in your development. All things work together good for those that love the Lord, and you may be able to flourish under those conditions for a season. Now, when you find that you have ceased growing in that capacity and those old tricks are no longer working, it means that God is asking more and more of you to yield to the light of truth. You've outgrown that, is what I'm telling you. You've already done that, been there, done that. The next level is to really bring the light in your personal thought to that discordant, dark, empty pocket of ignorance that appears to be out there, but it's actually in subjective thought. It's a state of hypnotism suggesting to you. Now, Mary Baker Eddy talked about the 2 facets of her ministry. Number 1 is you had to break fear first. She said that if you broke the fear, you're about 80% of the way to your healing or your provable demonstration. So if you have the fear, then you pray about the truth that God has not given me a spirit of fear, but spirit of peace, power, love, and a sound mind. God has given me that, and that's what I'm created in. Okay, so there's only one mind. It's God's mind, and there's no fear in that mind, and I am the manifestation of that mind. Now you can rest in that principle, and you just refuse to be budged off of it. You could be having adrenaline flushes, and you could be going into a state of panic and anxiety, and you just move beyond thinking and feeling, and you totally surrender all of your human will and put your concentrated focus on those thoughts, like Paul described, that are good. You put your thoughts on good, if anything is worthy of praise. Is it worthy of praise? Is your thought right now worthy of praise? Well, then you need to reach beyond thinking and feeling and go to your spiritual sense and move beyond human will and move into divine recognition. And what'll happen is as you reach and as you knock, okay? Knock and it will be opened. Knock. You have to knock. You have to press into the Father through thought and lay down your mortal sense of life. So, Father, I don't know what to do with this business in my human will. It's a state of hypnosis, and my human reasoning is creating the problem and then beating me up for not knowing the solution to the problem. So therefore, I think that human reasoning is the problem. And it's showing up as all these emanations of people, events, conditions, circumstances of good and evil that I've described. And it seems I'm trapped in this matrix. What do I do, Father? Well, thinking and feeling's how I got myself into this mess. Okay, I'm going to reach from soul awareness now. Now I'm going to go into the soul and take my soul to reach the divine spirit, the Holy Spirit. So your soul has to make contact with the Holy Spirit. And once it does, then the door will be opened. So soul awareness is I reach in through my spiritual sense. Yes, I could be feeling tremendous anxiety, fear, grief, you name it. All of these human sensations could be coming upon me like soldiers marching, armies coming at me. They are legions of darkness. But one with God is a majority, and so what I will do is I will reach to my Father in divine prayer, and I will say, Father, I know that every aspect of your creation was beautifully and wonderfully made, including me and my life, and that all that governs this life is your hand of divine love. The only power here is your hand. Divine love is all that ever came into being. And that divine love doesn't know a need or a lack or a sickness or a depravity or a relationship problem. What does that need have to do with me? Nothing. Because I am your reflection, Father. I refuse to be moved off of this idea. I am your recipient of your divine love, and nothing can come between that, because that's first in time, first in line. Divine law is, was, and always will be, and there's no other law that can infringe upon that. There's no other power. There's no other condition. And I just sit and hold that thought amid the terrible storm that's going on. I could be wanting to get angry. I could be wanting to break things. I could be wanting to cry or scream. And if I have to feel my way through this, then it's okay to feel things and not judge them. These are just phenomenon happening in an external illusion. So if I have to go bawl for a couple hours, I go and cry. And I recognize that that was the human mind playing out a dramatization of human reasoning. And I don't label it as good or bad. It's just phenomenon. And the whole time, I'm thinking of God's love for me. Now, this is exactly what I did when I broke a 5-year eating disorder. I had tried for 5 years, and you probably know this story already, and every day I used human reasoning while I was still continuing that behavioral cycle. And I said, okay, I've got the information now. I'll do it this way. I'll do it this way. And I read over 700 books, and I got super worldly educated in psychology and all these other I guess they're useful to some degree for some people, but they're essentially useless in terms of where I got my healing from. So one day I'm driving along, and Deepak Chopra audio's in my Cadillac when I'm driving. I had this beautiful 1995 Cadillac Seville. I'm driving down the road and I'm listening to the sutras. All of a sudden, I had a glimpse of my spiritual self. I caught for a fleeting moment. Oh, I am not a material creature. Wow, that space between thoughts really got me there. And I kept looking at the space between and pure awareness and stillness, and I kept rooting myself there. Well, that's one aspect of God, silence. Prayer is all about listening, and then God speaks in that silent space. Well, what happened was, this one evening on New Year's Eve, there was a party, and I was living in my girlfriend's basement at the time, and her parents were having a bunch of alcohol, and friends were over, and all this food, and that was a surefire recipe for me to continue that binging and purging bulimia cycle. But there was something different that happened on this day. I stopped judging myself. I recognized that nothing that happened out there was anything more than just phenomenon. That's what I called it. I said, this is just a phenomenon. It doesn't have a meaning. I took the meaning out of it. In other words, I gave all the power back to spirit. So therefore, I restored the first commandment. I had no other gods before spirit. So in other words, that flesh creature out there was not a god. It didn't have its own will to create its own dysfunction, its own sickness. Those foods didn't have power to, do a seance on me and call me in to submit to their will. And I certainly didn't have a mind of arrogant judgment and self-condemnation and self-hatred and a guilt complex because, pure awareness doesn't know anything about that. So in other words, I went through the motions. I remember having some drinks. I remember, eating a ton of food. And I'm like, well, it's going to happen again. And I got up and I walked over and I was like, yeah, this is where this. And I'm like, in that moment, instead of getting all worried and guilty and afraid, I held on to my spirit. And I was like, I love you. And I was talking to myself. I'm like, I love myself. And I really just held on to God's love the whole time. So my spiritual sense my soul reached up to spirit and hung on to a divine quality of love. And I hung on to that love. And I felt God's love so deeply. The outer man went through the phenomenal motions, and I just observed as the witness, as the outer man went through all that stuff. And the next morning, I got up, and something was different. I knew something changed, but I didn't know what it was. Well, it was about 3 weeks later. I hadn't had one binging or purging episode. I had never gone more than 2 or 3 days, tops. And here it was, 3 weeks later, before I even realized that night, by touching the hem of his garment, by taking soul and reaching spiritual sense, that I was healed. In the twinkling of an eye, I was transformed into the new man. I was a new consciousness. And this is how you apply spiritual transformation to anything that's going on in the outer. Now, you're going to have to put some application into it, and it would probably be good to feed your faith and, read the scripture and support yourself with things that support this idea. Don't go getting all lost in the world again and start believing a bunch of lies and try to fix the hypnosis, because then that's going to delay things. And the secret of secrets here is, remember this, there's 2 ways to do this. There's human will, and that's always trying to prove through your own works. That's actually arrogance with lipstick on. Well, then there's seeking first righteousness and all these things added onto you. That's grace. That's always done through humility. And that humility is to cast down all sense of what ought to be done under the circumstances. Everything that we think that we should keep doing because of traditions of men, the traditions of men. All of our fears that are beckoning us to take some form of human action. And most importantly, any level of impatience that's trying to use time and space to cause us to move through the human will. Because once we move into human will, we're going to go back into thinking and feeling again. And then we lose our soul sense connection to spirit. We have to get there through soul sense connection to spirit. So I'll talk more about this in our workshop coming up in the big idea, because that's what it's all about. So if you want to join it, do that. And look forward to my, I'm going to do the reaction video to my own song I just put up called Catch a Coin. And I'm going to break down all of the different ideas that are in that song so that you can see that it really is demonstrating what we're talking about here today. And what I've discovered is the fun thing about music and the fun thing about songs is you can really create yourself a hook, right? Okay, so a hook, ironically enough, they put it in a song. They call it a hook. Well, what does it do? Well, it causes you to reminisce on it and to really get it stuck in your head. And then what happens? Well, then it sinks into your unconscious mind. Well, and then what happens? Well, then you catch a coin. You catch a coin. Cast your net on the right side. What happens is it sinks in. And as Phineas Parker's Quimby discovered and wrote in his book, man lives in his idea. Well, you think about that. And if you want to go deep into that, we're going to focus on that whole process throughout that workshop. And I'll teach you how to do all that and have fun with it. And most likely it'll bring about a ton of phenomenal demonstrations. And as long as you're not attached to them and you don't make them gods and you don't make it to do about your human will, and you learn how to let God just become the source and substance of these ideas that you'll project from consciousness, then it can come to pass with least effort, allowing.